Hey everyone, so today's video is an update for my No Pan Left Behind project pan. This isn't necessarily like a formal project. It's more so me just trying to get use out of my eyeshadow palette collection. So I'm not necessarily rolling things in and rolling things out like a typical project pan. This is a project I can more so incorporate into my other project pans as well when I roll eyeshadow palettes into those projects. So these project pan updates are just sort of me updating you on the palettes that I have used. Basically, the premise of this project is to use every single pan of eyeshadow in your collection. So really, I am sometimes rolling palettes into other projects, and those are the palettes I will try to at least use every single shade once to sort of help me reach my goal for this project. So it's not really a single project on its own. Like, I'm sort of incorporating this project into all of my project pans just by using my eyeshadow palette collection. So these update videos are basically just me going to be telling you the eyeshadow palettes that I have used all the shades in, and just sort of what eyeshadow palettes I'm working on and currently using in my collection. And obviously you guys will sort of get to see my progress of how much of my eyeshadows I have actually used. So I will pop in sort of the update photos. I do have a spread in my bullet journal here of basically all of my eyeshadow pans, and you will be able to see from the last update compared to this update the couple eyeshadow palettes that I added to my collection, as well as the ones with an X through them are the palettes that I decluttered. I did recently do an eyeshadow palette declutter, so if you want to go check out my declutter playlist, that will be linked down below. But I did recently declutter quite a few eyeshadow palettes, probably like 5 or 6. So those ones I did just cross off in my sort of little spreadsheet. And then the ones that are highlighted are palettes where I have used every single shade in them at least once. So I will be actually showing you the palettes where I've used every single shade in them today. And then also just showing you the palettes that I am currently working on to reach my goal of using every shade in them. So the first palette we will start with is one of the newer palettes to my collection. It is the Essence Dancing Green palette, and I actually did a look with this when I first got it, and that look I used every single shade in it. So sort of by default, I very quickly used every single shade in here. Obviously it is a small palette. I feel like that's slightly cheating a little bit because I only did one eye look with this and I used all the shades. I feel like I should use this a little bit more. But the point of this project is to rotate through my palettes, not necessarily be using one palette for so long. So I feel like I do want to do another look with this, but I did technically use every single shade in here. Next up, the newest eyeshadow palette to my collection is my Natasha Denona Retro palette. I actually did relatively quickly use every single shade in here just because these are the everyday types of shades that I love to wear, and I really love every single shade in here. Obviously, this is a more wearable palette, and especially for me, these are the tones that I like to wear, but I also like that this has some variety in it. It's not like I feel like the Glam palette is one where you sort of get the same look with every time you use it, even though I don't have that palette, but just comparing it to other Natasha Denona shadows, I feel like this has some more warm tones over here, and then you get into some more cooler pinky tones over here. So I feel like there is some variety in this, even though it's obviously like a neutral palette. I did really love all of the looks that I created with this, so I pretty quickly used every single shade in here. And you can see, obviously I used every shade once, so it's not like I'm gonna be anywhere near hitting pan, but you can see like this palette does actually look somewhat used. Next up, a couple palettes I did show you in my previous update that I was working on. Then I have used all of these shades in my Sigma Warm Neutrals palette. This was rolled into another project pan, so my goal in that project was just to use every single shade in here once, and I do really love this palette. Again, it's another really pretty neutral palette, so I was relatively easily able to use all of the shades in here. And then again, another one that was in the last update for this project is my Pat McGrath Divine Rose palette. Again, this one is another neutral sort of rosy tone palette. So the types of shades that I wear every day. This one took me a while to use all the shades in here just because I was trying to hit pan on this shade. So I would dip into this just to reach for this shade. I wouldn't really end up reaching for any of the other shades, but eventually I did pretty easily use all of the shades in here when I really focused on using this palette. Now I'm going to be showing you the few palettes that I sort of just have sitting in my bathroom where I do my makeup, where I have all my makeup out that's in Project Pan. So these are the palettes that I'm currently working towards using all of the shades. So the first one is my Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. So these are the only two Natasha Denona palettes in my collection. Clearly, I love them both because I'm using them both towards the beginning of the year. So this is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. I like that it's a little bit more colorful, but it's still wearable. And I am currently trying to hit pan on this shade right here. So again, similar to the Pat McGrath palette, I'm really just using this to dip into this shade a lot of the time. I'm not necessarily going into all these other shades. But today I did throw some of these shades in the crease. I mixed this one with this one, and that just created a really pretty, almost orangey, warm toned shade for the crease. And I did also pop a little bit of this on the outer portion of my lid. So I am sort of remembering to use the other shades in this palette just because I know, or I hope I will hit pan on this soon. So I do want to be rolling, well, I will be rolling this palette out of the project that it's in right now. So I want to try to get use out of the other shades. I feel like there's not necessarily shades that I would mix together in this palette unless I'm doing a more bold look. Like I wouldn't necessarily put this orange like with this berry tone. So I feel like there's some like separate looks I would create with this palette. So I feel like it may take me a few more looks to get use out of every single shade in this palette. So I feel like that's why it's taking me a bit longer. But I'm also just taking my time because I know I haven't hit pan on this shade yet. And then we have my Pan That palette for this year. I guess this project or these project updates could technically be like an update for my Pan That palette because I haven't used this really at all. Like I've dipped into like maybe this cream shade and the highlight shade a couple times, but I haven't really been reaching for this at all. You can see in my little spreadsheet that I don't have many of these like used yet. Obviously, these lighter shades are really easy to use, but I feel like I'm also just not in a rush with this one since this is my Pan That palette for this year. I know I'm going to be using it all year, so I feel like there's no rush to try to use every single shade in here right away. So this one is one that's a lot slower. It's sort of like a slow but steady, and it's probably going to be in every one of these updates. So maybe I will just sort of use this project as my Pan That palette update because clearly I'm not making much progress on this palette. So I feel like it's not really necessary to do a whole separate update just for my Pan That palette. And then lastly, we have a palette of a bunch of my singles, which these two are in projects. So that's why I just sort of have this and I'm working on this beside these two matte shades that are in projects just because these are obviously all together. So I do want to try to get some use out of these. One or two of these Terra Moon shadows. So these 9 are Terra Moons. These 2 are either ColourPop or Makeup Geek. And then these 5 are JD Glow. So I have used like 1 or 2 of these JD Glow shades and then like 1 or 2 of the Terra Moon shades. The Terra Moons are super intense. So I find that I'm not necessarily working for these or reaching for these to go to work. Whereas the JD Glow ones are a little bit less intense, but they're still like pretty glittery and intense. And also, I mean, I guess they're neutral wearable shades. I should make more of an effort to reach for these because these are also like really pretty lid toppers. I can put them on very lightly and create a really natural look. So this is a palette where I like should be reaching for them, but I really just opened this to dip into these two shades, similar to the other palettes that are in project, which is another reason why I wanted to do the No Pan Left Behind project, because I find that I will just tend to dip into the shades that are in project pans and not really get use out of all of the eyeshadows in my eyeshadow palette collection. So that is pretty much it for this update. These updates are pretty short. Obviously, there's not a ton to update you guys on, but you can see in my little spreadsheet that I am a good portion of the way through this. Like, it's only March. I know I haven't used a lot of the other palettes in my collection, but I feel like as these start to get rolled out of my projects and I'm rolling some new palettes into my projects, I may also use this update to sort of roll palettes into this project to get use out of and use every single shade. But I may also start doing a Shop My Stash. So I may use that Shop My Stash as a way to roll palettes in to get use out of instead of rolling palettes sort of into this project, because I don't necessarily want to be rolling things in and out specifically just for this project. Like I said, I want to incorporate it into my other projects. So I may be doing a shop my stash where I roll some palettes in to get use out of, and that might be a way I more quickly hit my goals and get closer to my goal of using all of the eyeshadow pans in my collection. Also, with this palette, these are obviously all of my singles, so I do have my singles sort of written out on that spreadsheet as well. Basically, these bottom 4 palettes are all of my singles that are just in magnetic palettes. So those aren't necessarily like actual eyeshadow palettes, but they're palettes that I've created with my singles. So I am counting them in this project because obviously I do still want to get use out of my single eyeshadow palette collection, and my singles are a category that I tend to neglect a lot. So that's another reason why I wanted to incorporate them into this project as well. But if you did enjoy this video, and if you're doing a project like this or any other eyeshadow projects, let me know down below in the comments, and also make sure to give this video a thumbs up. I do post 2 to 3 videos a week, just depending on my schedule. So if you want to see more from me, make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon to get notified every time I post. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.